The autumn rain fell in sheets against the narrow windows of St. Catherine's Home for Children, creating rivers down the old glass panes that had stood witness to 7 decades of young lives passing through these weathered halls. Sister Maria Elena knelt in the small chapel, her rosary beads clicking softly between her fingers as she whispered prayers that had become as natural as breathing. At 28, she had devoted the past 6 years of her life to this place, to these children who had nowhere else to go. Her dark hair, pinned severely beneath her modest veil, framed a face that still carried the soft roundness of youth, though her eyes held a depth that came from witnessing too much sorrow too soon. She had grown up not far from here, in a modest home with parents who taught her that love meant service, that faith meant action. When they died in a car accident during her final year of university, she had abandoned her studies in education and turned to the church, seeking purpose in her grief. St. Catherine's had been struggling even then, but in the years since, the situation had grown desperate. The building needed repairs they couldn't afford. The heating system worked only intermittently. The children wore donated clothes that rarely fit properly, and Sister Maria Elena lay awake at night calculating how to stretch their dwindling funds to feed 23 hungry mouths for another month. The sound of the chapel door creaking open pulled her from her prayers. Sister Agnes, the elderly nun who managed the administrative side of the orphanage, stood in the doorway with an expression Maria Elena couldn't quite read. "There's a man here to see you," Sister Agnes said, her weathered hands twisting together in a gesture that betrayed nervousness. "He says he grew up here, decades ago." Maria Elena rose from the kneeler, smoothing her habit. Former residents sometimes returned, usually around the holidays, often with small donations or offers to volunteer. She had learned to be grateful for any help, no matter how modest. Nothing prepared her for the man waiting in the front parlor. He stood by the window, his back to her, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than the orphanage's entire monthly budget. His broad shoulders tapered to a narrow waist, and his dark hair was styled with casual precision. When he turned at the sound of her footsteps, Maria Elena felt her breath catch in a way that filled her with immediate shame. He was beautiful in the way Renaissance paintings captured masculine beauty. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes so dark they seemed to hold shadows within shadows. But it wasn't just his appearance that struck her. It was the way he carried himself, with a quiet authority that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed, and the hint of something dangerous lurking beneath his polished exterior. "Sister," he said, his voice deep and smooth, with the faintest trace of the old neighborhood accent he'd likely worked hard to minimize.
"I'm Dominic Castellano.
I lived here from age 6 to 16-inch. The name meant nothing to her, but she extended her hand anyway. "Sister Maria Elena. I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Castellano. Sister Agnes mentioned you grew up here." His hand enveloped hers, warm and firm, and he held it perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "A lifetime ago," he said, a shadow passing over his features. "I heard the orphanage was struggling. I wanted to help." Maria Elena withdrew her hand, clasping both of hers together in front of her. "Any help is welcome. The children would love to meet someone who once stood where they stand now. It gives them hope." Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, perhaps, or regret. "I'm not sure I'm the right kind of example," he said quietly. Then, as if shaking off the thought, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. "This is for the orphanage. No strings attached." She took the envelope, expecting maybe a few $100s, perhaps 1,000 if they were fortunate. When she opened it and saw the check, her hands began to shake. $500,000. "Mr. Castellano, this must be a mistake." "It's not a mistake, sister." He moved closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else, something that reminded her of autumn nights and distant wood smoke. "This place saved my life. The nuns here, they gave me food and shelter when I had nothing. They taught me to read, to believe I could be something more than what the streets wanted to make me." His eyes met hers, and Maria Elena saw depths of experience there that both frightened and fascinated her. "I know it's not enough to fix everything that needs fixing, but it's a start." For the heating system, the roof, whatever the children need. She looked down at the check again, her mind racing with all the repairs they could make. The warm clothes they could buy, the books and toys and simple comforts that had been impossible for so long. Tears pricked at her eyes. "Why now?" she asked, looking up at him. "Why come back after all these years?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the window where rain continued to streak down the glass. "I've spent the last 15 years building something," he said carefully. "Making money, gaining power, proving to everyone who said I'd end up dead or in prison that they were wrong. But lately, I've been thinking about what it all means, what I'm building it for." He turned back to her, and the vulnerability in his expression made her heart twist with unexpected sympathy. "I wanted to remember where I came from, to do something that mattered beyond balance sheets and business deals." Maria Elena found herself studying him with new eyes. There was more to this man than his expensive suit and generous donation. She could see the boy he'd been, alone and frightened in these halls, could imagine the struggles that had shaped him into this complicated, compelling man standing before her. "Would you like to see how the place has changed?" she heard herself ask, surprising herself with the offer. "Or perhaps meet some of the children?" His smile transformed his face, softening the hard edges and revealing a warmth that made her pulse quicken in a way that felt dangerous and thrilling. "I'd like that very much, sister." As she led him through the familiar corridors, pointing out the dining hall where meals were served, the library where she taught reading lessons, the playroom where children's laughter echoed during recreation time, Maria Elena found herself intensely aware of his presence beside her. He asked thoughtful questions about the children, about her work, about the challenges they faced beyond simple financial need. They paused outside the small room that served as her office, really just a converted storage closet with a desk and filing cabinet. "This is where I do the administrative work," she said, "trying to balance budgets that won't balance, writing grant applications that never get approved." Dominic stepped inside, his large frame making the tiny space feel even smaller. He ran his hand along the edge of her worn desk, taking in the stacks of papers, the old computer that took 10 minutes to boot up, the cheerful crayon drawings the children had made for her taped to the walls. "You do all this yourself?" he asked. "Sister Agnes helps, but she's 76 and shouldn't have to work so hard. We had another sister helping until last year, but the diocese reassigned her. They wanted to close this place entirely, but I convinced them to give us another year to improve the situation. And if you can't..." Maria Elena met his eyes steadily. "Then 23 children get sent to other facilities, some of them hours away from the only neighborhood they've ever known. They get separated from siblings, from friends, from everything familiar. I can't let that happen." The fierce determination in her voice seemed to affect him. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar on his chin that suggested a hard-won past. "You really care about them," he said, and it wasn't a question. "They're my whole world," she answered simply. "God called me to this work. I won't abandon it or them." Something in his expression shifted, an emotion she couldn't quite name flickering across his features. "I had a nun like you," he said quietly. "Sister Margaret. She convinced me to stay when I was 14 and ready to run away. Told me I was worth more than I thought, that I deserved a chance at a real life. What happened to her?" "She died my last year here. Heart attack. I never got to thank her properly for everything she did." His voice roughened slightly. "Maybe that's another reason I came back. To do for someone else what she did for me." Before Maria Elena could respond, the sound of children's voices flooded the hallway. Recreation time had ended, and the children were heading to the dining hall for dinner. Within moments, they were surrounded by curious faces, ranging from age 4 to 15. "Sister Maria, who's that?" asked Tommy, an 8-year-old with gap-toothed grin and endless energy. "This is Mr. Castellano," she said warmly. "He used to live here when he was your age." "Really?" Little Sophia, 6 years old with dark curls and enormous brown eyes, stepped forward shyly. Did you sleep in the boys' dormitory? Dominic crouched down to Sophia's level, his severe expression softening. I did. Second bed from the left. Is that room still there? Sophia nodded enthusiastically, and soon Dominic was surrounded by children asking questions, showing him drawings, telling him about their daily routines. Maria Elena watched in wonder as this powerful, intimidating man transformed in the presence of these orphan children, his guard dropping to reveal a gentleness she suspected few people ever witnessed. When Marcus, a 14-year-old who struggled with anger and abandonment issues, hung back from the group, Dominic noticed. He made his way through the crowd of children and stood beside the teenager. You look like you're planning your escape, Dominic said quietly, just loud enough for Maria Elena to hear. I used to stand exactly like that, counting the days until I could leave. Marcus looked up, startled and defensive. So I get it. Being here, it feels like punishment for something you didn't do. Like the whole world decided you don't matter. Dominic's voice carried the weight of lived experience. But the people here, they care, even when it doesn't feel like it. And the person you become depends on whether you let them help you or push them away. What did you do? Marcus asked, trying to sound tough but unable to hide his curiosity. Both, Dominic admitted. I pushed away so many people who wanted to help. Thought I had to be hard, had to prove I didn't need anyone. Took me years to realize that was the loneliest way to live. Marcus was quiet, processing this. Then, almost too softly to hear, he said, Did it get better? After you left? Dominic's pause lasted long enough that Maria Elena held her breath. It got different, he finally said. Better in some ways, harder in others. But I survived. And so will you. During dinner, Dominic sat at the long table with the children, helping the little ones cut their food and listening to their chatter with apparent interest. Maria Elena found herself stealing glances at him, trying to reconcile the wealthy businessman with the man who seemed so at ease among these forgotten children. After the meal, after prayers and bedtime routines and the final settling of 23 children into sleep, Maria Elena found Dominic waiting in the front parlor, staring at an old photograph on the wall that showed St. Catherine's in its earlier days. You're still here, she said, surprised. I wanted to say goodbye properly, he said, turning to face her, and to ask if I could come back, to visit, to help with whatever needs doing. I know my money can fix buildings and buy supplies, but there's more that needs fixing here than what money can solve.
Maria Elena hesitated.
Everything about this felt complicated and potentially dangerous. Not because she feared him, but because of the way her heart had betrayed her today, racing at his nearness, warming at his smiles. She was a nun, devoted to God and to her calling. These feelings were inappropriate, impossible. But when she looked at the hope in his eyes, the genuine desire to do good that seemed to war with whatever darkness he carried, she couldn't refuse. The children would love that, she said carefully. We could use help with tutoring, repairs, organizing activities. If you're serious about wanting to contribute your time as well as your money. I'm serious, he said, and the intensity in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. More serious than I've been about anything in a long time. He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to look at her with an expression that made her breath catch. Thank you, Sister Maria Elena, for what you do here for these children, for letting me remember who I used to be before the world got complicated. After he left, Maria Elena stood in the empty parlor for a long time, her hand pressed against her chest as if she could calm her racing heart through force of will alone. She should be grateful for the donation, pleased that a former resident wanted to help. That's all this was, all it could be. But as she climbed the stairs to her small room, as she knelt beside her narrow bed to pray, Maria Elena couldn't lie to herself. Something had shifted today, some careful balance she'd maintained between duty and desire. And God help her, she didn't know how to restore it. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm at St. Catherine's. Dominic returned 3 times a week, always in the evening after the children finished their homework. He tutored the older children in mathematics and history, played games with the younger ones, and slowly, carefully worked on building trust with those who had learned that adults couldn't be relied upon. The heating system was repaired within the first week. The roof followed. New beds arrived, along with warm blankets, sturdy shoes, and enough books to fill the small library twice over. Dominic never made a show of these improvements, never sought recognition or gratitude. He simply made things happen with quiet efficiency. Maria Elena tried to maintain professional distance, but it became increasingly difficult as she witnessed the man Dominic truly was beneath his carefully constructed exterior. She saw how patient he was with 7-year-old Michael, who struggled with reading and grew frustrated easily. She watched him sit quietly with 13-year-old Anna, who rarely spoke, until the girl finally began to trust him with small pieces of her story. She learned details about him in fragments, that he owned several businesses throughout the city, though he never specified what kind, that he lived alone in a penthouse apartment overlooking the river, that he had never married, never had children, never let anyone close enough to see beyond the walls he'd built. "Don't you get lonely?" she asked him one evening after the children had gone to bed. They were in the common room, cleaning up art supplies from the afternoon's project. Dominic looked up from the paint brushes he was washing in the small sink. "Lonely implies wanting something different," he said carefully. "I chose this life. That doesn't answer the question." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You're very direct, sister." "One of my many flaws," she said, smiling back, "along with stubbornness, impatience, and a terrible singing voice. I heard you singing with the children yesterday during music time. It wasn't terrible. You're very kind to lie." He laughed, a sound she'd come to treasure for its rarity. "I've been called many things, sister, but kind has never been one of them." Maria Elena set down the paper she was sorting and looked at him directly. "I think you underestimate yourself. The children see the kindness in you. I see it too." The laughter faded from his face, replaced by something more complicated. He dried his hands slowly, deliberately, before speaking. "What you see is someone trying to make amends for a life that hasn't always been kind to others." "What does that mean?" Dominic was quiet for so long that Maria Elena thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and carefully controlled. "The businesses I run, sister, they're not all strictly legal. I've done things I'm not proud of, hurt people, made choices that served my interests at others' expense. The man standing in this orphanage isn't the same man I am in the rest of my life." Maria Elena felt her heart constrict. She'd suspected there was more to his story, had seen hints of danger in the way he carried himself, in the deference shown to him by the men who occasionally waited for him outside in expensive cars. But hearing him admit it made it real in a way that should have frightened her. Instead, all she felt was sadness for the burden he carried. "People aren't just one thing," she said quietly. "We all contain multitudes, the capacity for good and for harm. What matters is what we choose, every day, when we wake up and decide who we want to be. And if I've made too many wrong choices, if the scales can never balance." She moved closer to him, close enough to see the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. "Then you make different choices going forward. God's grace isn't a mathematical equation, Dominic. It's not about earning enough points to cancel out the bad. It's about transformation, about becoming who you were meant to be." His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Who was I meant to be, sister?" "I think you're figuring that out," she said softly. "I see it in how you are with the children, how you care for this place. That's the real you, not the person the world made you think you had to become." Dominic reached out slowly, as if giving her time to move away, and touched her cheek with the backs of his fingers. The gesture was so gentle, so unexpected, that Maria Elena froze. "You have no idea how dangerous you are," he whispered. "How you make me want to be the man you think I can be." The air between them felt charged with possibility and impossibility in equal measure. Maria Elena knew she should step back, should remind him and herself of the boundaries that couldn't be crossed. But for a moment, just a moment, She let herself imagine a different life, a different set of choices. Then reality crashed back. She stepped away, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "I should check on the children," she said, her voice unsteady. "Thank you for your help tonight." She left before he could respond, practically fleeing to the safety of the hallway. In the small chapel, she knelt and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, all she could think about was the warmth of his touch, the longing in his eyes, and the terrifying realization that she was falling in love with a man she could never have. The situation reached a crisis point on a cold December evening, 2 months after Dominic's first visit. The orphanage was preparing for Christmas, and the children's excitement filled the halls with an energy that even the old building's drafts couldn't diminish. Dominic had brought an enormous Christmas tree, along with boxes of ornaments and enough gifts to ensure every child would have something to open on Christmas morning. Maria Elena found him in the common room after the children had gone to bed, sitting alone in the dark except for the twinkling lights on the tree. "You shouldn't have spent so much," she said softly, sitting in the chair across from him. "They deserve something special," he replied, his gaze fixed on the lights. "I remember what it was like, spending Christmas here, trying to pretend it didn't matter that other kids had families waiting for them. Did anyone ever come for you? To visit or take you home for the holidays?" Dominic shook his head. "My father died when I was 5. My mother dropped me here a year later and never came back. I heard she died a few years after that, but no one was ever certain. There were no other relatives who wanted me, or if there were, they never made themselves known." The pain in his voice broke her heart.
I'm sorry.
"Don't be. It made me strong. Made me realize I could only count on myself." He finally looked at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her throat tighten. "At least that's what I told myself for years, until I met you." "Dominic." "Let me finish," he said, leaning forward. "These past 2 months, being here, being with you and these children, it's changed something in me. Made me remember what it feels like to care about something beyond money and power and proving I'm worth something." He stood and moved to her chair, kneeling beside it so they were eye level. "I know what you are, what you've committed yourself to. I know I have no right to feel this way, to say these things. But I can't keep pretending that what I feel for you is anything less than love." Maria Elena's breath caught. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building between them like a storm gathering strength. But hearing him say it made it real, made it impossible to ignore. "I love you," Dominic continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I love your dedication to these children, your faith even when things seem hopeless, the way you see good in people who've forgotten how to see it in themselves. You make me want to be better, to deserve the way you look at me." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You can't say these things to me." "Why? Because you're a nun? Because you've made vows that say you can't feel what I know you feel?" She stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "Because it's impossible. Because I've dedicated my life to God, to this work. Because you live in a world I don't understand, doing things I can't condone. Because even if I wanted to," her voice broke, "even if I felt the same way, there's no future for us." Dominic rose slowly, his expression a mixture of hope and desperation. "There could be, if you wanted it badly enough. If what we feel is strong enough to matter. And what about my vows? My calling? The children who need me? I'm not asking you to abandon them. I would never ask that." He moved closer again, and she found she couldn't back away. "But maybe God's plan isn't what you thought it was. Maybe he brought me here for a reason that goes beyond donations and repairs." His words echoed thoughts she'd been trying desperately to suppress. Late at night, she'd found herself questioning everything. Her calling, her vows, the life she'd thought was settled. She'd prayed for clarity, for strength, for God to take away these feelings that shouldn't exist. Instead, they'd only grown stronger. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I've never felt so lost." Dominic reached for her hands, holding them gently. "Then don't decide tonight. Don't decide anything until you're sure. But know that I'm here, that I'll wait as long as it takes. that whatever you choose, I'll respect it. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that felt like both a promise and a goodbye. Then he left, and Maria Elena sank to the floor beneath the Christmas tree, sobbing as she'd never allowed herself to sob before. Sister Agnes found her there an hour later. The old nun said nothing, just sat beside her and held her while she cried. Finally, when the tears subsided, Agnes spoke. "I've been a nun for 54 years, she said quietly. "I've counseled dozens of young women through crises of faith and calling. So I'm going to tell you something I learned long ago. God doesn't ask us to be perfect. He asks us to be honest with ourselves and with Him." "I don't know what I want anymore," Maria Elena confessed. "I thought I knew my path, my purpose. Now everything feels uncertain." "Love will do that," Agnes said with gentle understanding. "Real love, the kind that changes you, it doesn't care about our plans or our certainties. It just is. But my vows are between you and God. Not you and me, not you and the church, not even you and these children. Only you can know if you made those vows out of genuine calling or out of grief and a need for purpose after your parents died." The words hit like a physical blow because they touched on something Maria Elena had never let herself examine too closely. Had she truly been called to this life? Or had she been running from pain, seeking structure and meaning in the chaos of loss? "I need time," she said. "Time to pray, to think, to understand what God truly wants from me." Agnes nodded. "Then take it. Take whatever time you need. But be honest with yourself, child. False humility and martyrdom help no one, least of all God." Christmas came and went in a blur of children's laughter and makeshift celebrations. Dominic stayed away, giving Maria Elena the space she'd needed to think. But his presence haunted her. In the new heating system that kept the children warm, in the books filling the library, in every corner of the orphanage he'd helped restore, she prayed constantly, searching for answers that wouldn't come. She threw herself into work with renewed intensity, as if exhaustion might bring clarity. She met with the priest who served as her spiritual advisor, an elderly man who listened patiently and offered no easy answers. "The religious life is a gift," Father Miguel told her, "but it's not the only way to serve God. Marriage, family, work in the world, these are equally sacred when approached with love and devotion. The question isn't which path is more holy, but which path is truly yours." In early January, when snow blanketed the city and the children were back in their routine after the holiday break, Maria Elena finally had to admit the truth she'd been avoiding. She wanted to leave, not because her love for God had diminished, not because she didn't care about the children, but because she'd realized that her vows had been made from grief rather than genuine calling. She loved Dominic. She wanted a life with him, wanted to explore what they could be together. And more than that, she wanted the freedom to make that choice without feeling like she was betraying everything she believed in. The process of being released from her vows took weeks. There were meetings with church officials, psychological evaluations, endless forms and discussions about her motivations and certainty. Through it all, Sister Agnes supported her, helping her navigate the bureaucracy while still managing the orphanage. "What will happen to this place?" Maria Elena asked Agnes one evening, anxiety gnawing at her. "Who will care for the children?" Agnes smiled. "The diocese has agreed to assign 2 new sisters to help me, and Mr. Castellano has established a trust fund that ensures the orphanage can operate indefinitely. The children will be fine. They'll miss you terribly, of course, but they'll be fine. He did that. He came to see me right after Christmas, said that whether or not you chose to be with him, he wanted to make sure the orphanage and the children would always be cared for. He's a complicated man, but his heart is in the right place." Maria Elena hadn't seen Dominic since that night before Christmas. She'd asked him to stay away while she worked through her decision, not wanting his presence to influence her in either direction. But she missed him with an ache that confirmed everything she'd decided. Finally, in late February, she received official word that she was released from her vows. She was no longer Sister Maria Elena. She was simply Elena Martinez, a 28-year-old woman standing at the threshold of an entirely new life. She found Dominic at his office, a sleek space on the 40th floor of a downtown building with windows that overlooked the city. His secretary looked surprised when Elena gave her name but buzzed her through immediately. Dominic stood when she entered, his expression carefully neutral, as if he was bracing himself for disappointment. He looked thinner, she noticed, and tired in a way that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. "Elena," he said, and hearing her name without the title made her heart skip. "I wasn't expecting." "I love you," she interrupted, needing to say it before fear could silence her. "I've probably loved you since that first day when you knelt down to talk to Sophia, when I saw how gentle you could be. I fought it for so long because I thought loving you meant betraying everything I believed in." She moved closer, her hands clasped together to keep them from shaking. "But I've realized that love isn't a betrayal. It's a gift. And denying it, forcing myself to live a life I was never truly called to, that was the real betrayal. Of myself, of you, and yes, even of God, who I think brought us together for a reason." Dominic stood frozen, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. "You're not a nun anymore." "Not for 2 days now. It took time to process the paperwork to make sure I was certain. But I am certain, Dominic. About you, about us, about wanting to build a life together." He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides, pulling her into his arms with a fierceness that stole her breath. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough against her hair. "Because once I have you, Elena, I'm never letting you go." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, seeing the love and vulnerability and hope blazing in his dark eyes. "I'm sure. But Dominic, I need you to be sure too. I know what you do, the life you've led. I'm not naive enough to think that will all just disappear." "It won't," he said honestly. "I can't undo my past or completely change who I am overnight. But I swear to you, Elena, I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you. I'll work to make my businesses legitimate, to leave behind the parts of my life that would bring you shame or pain. You make me want to be better." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest with me, to include me in your life, to let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." He kissed her then, gentle at first, then with growing passion as weeks of longing and uncertainty dissolved into the reality of being together. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Elena laughed with pure joy. "I can't believe this is real," she said. 2 months ago, I was a nun convinced I'd spend my life in service to the church. Now I'm here with you, starting over completely. Do you regret it?" She looked into his eyes and saw the fear lurking there, the lifetime of abandonment that made him doubt anyone would truly stay. "Not for a second," she said firmly. "This is where I'm meant to be." The months that followed were a period of adjustment and discovery. Elena moved into Dominic's penthouse, marveling at the luxury after years of austere living. She struggled initially with having nice things, with the wealth that felt almost obscene after watching children go without. But Dominic was patient, helping her find a balance that felt right. She continued working with the orphanage, now as a volunteer rather than a nun, teaching classes and helping with fundraising. Dominic worked to legitimize his business holdings, a process that was slower and more complicated than either of them had hoped. There were still parts of his life he kept from her, meetings he wouldn't discuss, phone calls he took in another room, caused tension between them. Elena hated feeling shut out, hated knowing that some of his work likely involved activities she couldn't condone. They fought about it more than once, harsh words exchanged in the heat of frustration. "I'm trying," Dominic shouted during one particularly bitter argument. "Do you think it's easy to walk away from everything I've built? To risk the consequences of leaving that world behind? I never asked you to do it overnight." Elena shot back. "But I need honesty, Dominic. I need to know what I'm part of, what we're building together. You can't keep sections of your life locked away and expect me to just accept it." He ran his hands through his hair, the gesture betraying his frustration. "I'm trying to protect you. Some of the things I've done, the people I've associated with. It's not something I want touching you. That's not your decision to make. I'm not some delicate thing that needs sheltering. I knew who you were when I chose this. The fight ended with both of them exhausted and no closer to resolution. But it forced Dominic to confront something he'd been avoiding. Truly leaving his old life behind would require more than just financial restructuring. It would require full transparency with Elena, even when that transparency revealed ugly truths. Over dinner a few nights later, he told her everything. About the loan sharking operation he'd run in his 20s, the gambling establishments that still operated in legal gray areas, the enforcement work he'd done that had left people injured or worse. He told her about rivals who'd been eliminated, about corruption he'd participated in, about all the ways he'd justified his actions by telling himself he was just surviving in a brutal world. Elena listened without interrupting, though her hands trembled and tears slid down her cheeks. When he finished, they sat in heavy silence. I don't know if I can reconcile the man you're describing with the man I love, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. How can the same person who beats people for money be the person who tutors children and fixes orphanages? I told you I wasn't a good man, Dominic said, though his voice was hollow. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe you should go back to the church. Find someone better. Someone who deserves. Stop, Elena interrupted. Just stop. I'm angry and hurt and confused. But I'm not leaving. I made a choice, and I don't abandon people I love just because they're complicated or broken. She reached across the table for his hand. But Dominic, you have to be done with all of it. Completely. I can forgive the past if it truly stays in the past. But I won't. I can't be with someone who's still hurting people. I will, he promised, gripping her hand like a lifeline. I swear to you, Elena, I'm done with all of it. I'll sell off the businesses that can't be made legitimate, cut ties with everyone from that world. Whatever it takes. It wasn't easy. Extracting himself from that life came with costs and consequences. There were threats, intimidation attempts, a brick thrown through the penthouse window with a note warning him about betrayal. Elena discovered what it meant to love someone with dangerous enemies, to wake up in the middle of the night checking to make sure he was still breathing beside her. But Dominic kept his promise. He hired lawyers, accountants, and consultants to help restructure his holdings. He paid off debts and obligations, sometimes at great financial cost. He met with former associates to explain his departure, taking their anger and accusations without defending himself because he knew he deserved it all and more. Through it all, Elena stood by him. She held him when nightmares woke him, when the guilt of his past actions threatened to overwhelm him. She reminded him that redemption was possible, that transformation was real, that the man he was becoming mattered more than the man he had been. 6 months after Elena left the convent, Dominic proposed. They were at St. Catherine's, helping the children with an art project, when he suddenly got down on one knee in the middle of the playroom. 23 children immediately stopped what they were doing to watch. Elena Martinez, he said, pulling a simple ring from his pocket. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You loved me when I didn't think I deserved love. Will you marry me? The children erupted in excited squeals before Elena could answer. She laughed through happy tears, pulling him to his feet. Yes, she said simply. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They married 3 months later in a small ceremony at St. Catherine's Chapel. Father Miguel officiated, and Sister Agnes stood beside Elena as her maid of honor. Marcus, now 15 and thriving under Dominic's mentorship, served as best man. All the children attended, dressed in new clothes Dominic had bought specially for the occasion. As Elena walked down the short aisle toward Dominic, she saw tears streaming down his face. This man who'd survived so much, who'd built walls so high to protect himself, stood before her completely vulnerable, his love written plainly in every line of his face. I never thought I'd have this, he whispered when she reached him, taking her hands in his. Never thought I deserved it. We deserve each other, she whispered back. All the broken pieces and complicated parts. We fit. Their vows were traditional but carried extra weight for all they'd been through to reach this moment. When Father Miguel pronounced them married, the children cheered so loudly the old chapel's rafters seemed to shake. The reception was held in the orphanage's dining hall, decorated with streamers and flowers the children had helped arrange. There was cake and music and dancing, and Elena thought she'd never seen Dominic look as happy as he did twirling Sophia around the floor while the little girl giggled with delight. Later, after the celebration ended and the children were in bed, Elena and Dominic stood in the front parlor where they'd first met nearly a year earlier. "Do you remember standing here that first day?" Elena asked, leaning against her husband's chest. "I thought you were just another wealthy donor trying to ease his conscience. And I thought you were just another nun who'd judge me for my past," Dominic replied, his arms wrapped around her. "We were both wrong." "We were both right, too," Elena said. "In some ways, you were trying to ease your conscience, and I did judge you. But we looked deeper. We saw past the easy assumptions to who we really were." Dominic turned her in his arms so they were face to face. "I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. You know that, right?" "I know," she said, reaching up to kiss him. "And I love you the same way. Impossibly. Completely." They moved into a new home a few months after the wedding. Not the penthouse but a restored brownstone in the old neighborhood, close enough to St. Catherine's that Elena could walk there every day. It had space for the life they were building together, with rooms they hoped would someday be filled with children of their own. Dominic fully legitimized all his business holdings, a process that took nearly 2 years and cost him significant money and influence. But he never regretted it. He built something new, something clean, and found satisfaction and success that didn't require compromising his values or Elena's. Elena established a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting orphanages and foster care systems throughout the city. Dominic's money funded it, but Elena ran it with the same fierce dedication she'd brought to St. Catherine's. Together, they became advocates for forgotten children, using their combined skills and resources to make real change. On their first anniversary, they returned to St. Catherine's for a special dinner with the children. As they sat around the familiar table, laughing at the children's jokes and helping them with their food, Elena caught Dominic's eye across the table. So much had changed since that rainy autumn day when a wealthy stranger had walked through these doors. She'd left behind her vows and the life she'd thought was settled. He'd left behind his dangerous past and the man he'd been forced to become. They'd both taken enormous risks, faced impossible choices, and rebuilt themselves from the ground up. But sitting here, surrounded by children's laughter and the warmth of the place that had brought them together, Elena knew with absolute certainty that every choice had been worth it. After dinner, while the children played in the common room, Elena and Dominic found themselves alone in the small chapel. She knelt in the familiar position she'd occupied countless times before, but now Dominic knelt beside her. "Do you miss it?" he asked quietly. "The religious life?" Elena considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," she admitted. "The clear rules, the structured days, the sense of purpose that came from following a predetermined path. But no, I don't miss it enough to wish things were different." She turned to look at him, taking in the face she now knew as well as her own. "My purpose now is more complicated, messy, harder to define. But it's real in a way I'm not sure the other ever was. I serve God through loving you, through our work with children, through choosing every day to be kind and generous and faithful to what matters." Dominic took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I used to think God abandoned me when my parents died, when I ended up alone in this place with no one who wanted me. I was so angry for so long. And now I think maybe God was just taking the long way around," he said, a slight smile touching his lips. "Bringing me here as a boy so I could come back as a man. Letting me make all my mistakes so I'd be ready when I finally found you. I don't know if that's theologically sound, but it's what I believe." Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. "I think God works in ways we can't always understand in the moment. We make our plans and commit to our paths, but sometimes the plans change. Sometimes the path takes an unexpected turn. And sometimes, If we're brave enough to follow where it leads, we end up exactly where we were meant to be. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen love over certainty and faith over fear. The old chapel had witnessed so many prayers, so many desperate pleas and hopeful wishes. Elena liked to think that it held them all, that every prayer she'd offered here had somehow led to this moment. Eventually, they rose and returned to the common room, where Marcus was teaching the younger children a card game and Sophia was showing off a drawing she'd made. Dominic immediately got pulled into a debate about the rules of the game, while Elena admired Sophia's artwork with appropriate enthusiasm. This was their life now. Not perfect, not simple, but real and rich and full of love. They'd both given up so much to be together, had risked everything on the belief that what they felt was worth the cost. And every day, in moments like this, they proved that belief to be true. When they finally left St. Catherine's that evening, walking hand in hand through the familiar streets of the old neighborhood, Elena found herself thinking about wishes. About the simple wish she'd had when she first became a nun, to help orphan children, to make a difference in their lives. She'd thought she knew what that meant, had believed she understood the shape her life would take. She'd been so wrong, and so right. Her wish had come true, just not in any way she could have imagined. She'd helped children, was still helping them, but as part of a bigger, more complicated life than she'd ever planned. She'd found love she'd never expected, had become someone she'd never imagined being. And the man beside her, the former orphan who'd returned to his childhood home carrying the weight of his mistakes and a desperate hope for redemption. He'd found what he was looking for too. Not just financial success or social acceptance, but genuine transformation. A chance to be the person he was meant to be, supported by someone who loved him without illusion but also without judgment. "What are you thinking about?" Dominic asked as they reached their front door. "Wishes," Elena said, fitting her key into the lock, "and how they come true in unexpected ways." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead with such tenderness that her heart swelled. "I wished for you," he said quietly. "Every night I spent in that orphanage, I wished for someone who would see past all the armor to who I really was. Someone who would love me anyway. And I wished for purpose," Elena replied. "For a life that mattered, for work that made a difference. I thought I knew what that looked like. Turns out, I didn't have any idea." They went inside, into the home they'd made together, and closed the door on the cold winter night. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be challenges, they both knew that, they would face them together. Two broken people who'd found healing in unexpected love, who'd rebuilt their lives from the foundation up, who'd learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see your heart. In the years that followed, their life continued to evolve and deepen. Elena's nonprofit grew, helping hundreds of children across the city. Dominic mentored young men from difficult backgrounds, offering them opportunities and guidance he wished someone had given him. They became foster parents themselves, opening their home to teenagers who needed stability and love. On slow Sunday mornings, they still visited St. Catherine's, now thriving under Sister Agnes's leadership and the support of the two younger nuns who'd joined her. They watched as children they'd known graduated from the system, found families, built lives. They celebrated successes and mourned setbacks, staying invested in every story. Marcus became like a son to them. He went to college on a scholarship Dominic had established, studied business, and eventually joined Dominic's company. On the day he graduated, he stood at the podium and thanked, "The man who showed me that your past doesn't have to determine your future, and the woman who taught me that love can heal almost anything." Elena cried through his entire speech, and Dominic held her hand so tightly she thought her fingers might break. Life wasn't perfect. They still fought sometimes, still struggled with the ordinary challenges of marriage and work and balancing their different needs and personalities. There were days when Elena missed the simplicity of her old life, when certainty felt more comfortable than the constant negotiation of partnership. There were days when Dominic's past cast long shadows, when old associates resurfaced or old habits threatened to reassert themselves. But they worked through it all together, with honesty and patience and the kind of love that grows deeper with time rather than fading. They built a life that honored both their individual callings and their commitment to each other, proving that you don't have to choose between love and purpose. Sometimes, if you're lucky, they become the same thing. 10 years after that first rainy autumn evening when Dominic had walked into St. Catherine's, they stood in the same chapel for a different ceremony. Sister Agnes, now 86 and frail but still sharp as ever, was retiring. The diocese was throwing her a celebration, and everyone whose life she'd touched had been invited. The chapel was packed with former orphans, now adults with families of their own. They took turns sharing stories about Sister Agnes, about the ways she'd shaped their lives, about the love she'd shown when they needed it most. When it was Dominic's turn to speak, he stood at the front of the chapel and looked out at all the faces. Some he recognized, many he didn't. But they were all connected by this place, by the experience of being unwanted children who'd found temporary home in these walls. Sister Agnes taught me that family isn't always blood, he began, his voice steady and clear. That home isn't always the place you're born. That love, real love, is a choice we make every day to see value in another person and to act accordingly. He glanced at Elena, sitting in the front row, and smiled. She taught me that second chances are real, that transformation is possible, that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. I didn't believe her for a long time. I thought I was too damaged, too far gone, too hardened by life to ever be anything but what circumstances had made me. His voice roughened with emotion. But she planted seeds that eventually grew. And when I finally came back to this place, broken and desperate and trying to find some way to make meaning out of my mess of a life, those seeds were ready to bloom. With the help of someone else who saw in me what Sister Agnes always had, the possibility of goodness. He looked at Agnes, sitting in her chair of honor, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything you gave me, even when I didn't know how to receive it, for being patient with a scared, angry boy, for believing that love could reach him eventually." There wasn't a dry eye in the chapel when he sat down. Elena took his hand, squeezing it in silent support and shared emotion. After the ceremony, as people mingled and shared food and memories, Dominic found himself standing in the same spot where he'd stood that first evening, looking at the old photograph of St. Catherine's. "This place saved my life twice," he said to Elena, who'd come to stand beside him. "Once when I was a boy with nowhere else to go, and once when I was a man who'd forgotten how to feel anything real. It brought us together," Elena added. "This place, these children, this mission. It's the foundation of everything we've built." Dominic turned to her, pulling her into his arms. After 10 years of marriage, the gesture was familiar, comfortable, but still sent warmth flooding through her. "I love you," he said, as he did every day. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." "Thank you for being worth the chance," she replied, as she always did. They stood there together, in the place where everything had begun, surrounded by the echoes of prayers and wishes and desperate hopes that had been offered up over the decades. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd built something beautiful from broken pieces, who'd learned that love, real, transformative, powerful love, was worth every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of uncertainty. The brunette nun's wish had been to help orphans. She'd gotten that wish, just not in the way she'd imagined. And the rich mafia boss's wish, buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it existed, had been to matter to someone, to be loved not for what he could provide but for who he truly was. They'd both gotten their wishes. They'd found their home. And in finding each other, they'd discovered that sometimes the most sacred calling isn't the one you choose, but the one that chooses you when you're brave enough to listen to your heart. As the sun set over the city, casting golden light through the old chapel windows, Elena and Dominic walked out hand in hand, ready to return to the life they'd built together. Behind them, St. Catherine stood as it always had, a testament to hope and second chances, to the power of love to transform even the most broken among us. Their story had begun here, in this place of orphan children and desperate prayers. But it had grown beyond these walls, spreading out into the world, touching lives, making differences in ways both small and profound. And it would continue, Day by day, choice by choice, as they lived out their shared purpose of bringing light to dark places and hope to hopeless situations. Because that's what love does. When it's real and true and brave, transforms. It redeems. It makes all things new. And that, Elena thought as they walked home through the familiar streets, was the greatest miracle of all.